Hello, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm Chris Cardwell, Program Manager for Deep Roots, Kansas City, coming to you live this afternoon from unsunny, untropical Portland, Oregon, hoping that the weather in Kansas City is as nice as Sydney says. And I'm so pleased to be welcoming you to today's exciting September session of Deep Roots Lunch and Learn series. But before I introduce our speaker and today's topic, we want to make a few announcements, as always. First of all, we're incredibly grateful to the Missouri Department of Conservation for their sponsorship, dedicated support of this and all other Deep Roots programming. And also, importantly, we're especially grateful to you for your participation and support of our educational programs and webinars. We take great pride in creating these personalized educational contents for viewers like you. Now, this webinar will be recorded and up on the Deep Roots website very soon. You'll receive an email with the link and resources mentioning during the broadcast. So watch your email and our website, and if you subscribe to that YouTube channel, you will be notified each time we upload. Now, during the program, please again put your questions in the Q&A tool on Zoom, and put your feedback and enthusiastic comments in the chat, where I will be sharing the links and other information to resources that are shared by our speaker. So without further ado, today we will be welcoming back to the stage Deep Roots' webinar maven emeritus, Sarah Beier of Oak and Io Design. Many of you joined us for the riveting world debut of our Sweet 16 Most Likely to Succeed Native Plant List. That was during August's Lunch and Learn episode, and it drew enormous interest and acclaim. Now, in recent months, Sarah, in addition to serving her design clients and providing invaluable education and outreach for our community, has been behind the scenes in her content creation laboratory, developing a brand new extension series of native plant landscape education programs as a result of a partnership between Deep Roots, Mid-America Regional Council, with underwriting from the Health Forward Foundation. Now, this next 5-part installment of a series of online content will serve as a long-awaited follow-up to Sarah's Intro to Native Landscape episodes that were first aired back in 2022. Now, that first volume of installments, of course, are always available to return to, archived at deeproots.org/webinars. It is my pleasure to bring this first released installment to the public today, entitled Branching Out, bringing us up to speed on some of the finest selections of native trees and shrubs for our Midwest region, with perfect timing for fall plant sale and native planting season. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Sarah Beier.
Thanks so much, Chris. I am excited to be here and to share one of those webinars, as Chris mentioned, from the continuation of our native landscaping series. So while I get my screen shared here, alrighty. So hopefully you're able to see that. So I called today's episode Branching Out, choosing the best trees and shrubs. Branching out, both for obviously the pun, I can never pass up a pun, but also because I feel like we don't talk about trees and shrubs enough when we talk about native plants, and they provide so much value for us and so often are overlooked. So want to rectify that today. Got a lot to cover. We're going to look at some of the best selections for the Kansas City area, and we're also going to talk about planting and care as we get through it. So just real quickly here, a little bit about me. As Chris said, I am a native landscape designer. I am also a lifelong lover of nature. I am a self-proclaimed native plant geek. I am a former babe in the woods. You can see me there on the left as a toddler. I am still to this day a frequent tree hugger. I am, however, not an arborist, and I do encourage you to know when to call a professional, especially as we get later on when we start talking about pruning. Life's too short to go out in an impromptu chainsaw juggling routine. So we'll encourage you to kind of know when to cry uncle and call a pro. So as we move along, let's talk first about the benefits of trees and shrubs. Tons of wildlife benefit from our tree and shrub species. So if you're familiar with Doug Tallamy's work on keystone species, those native plants that provide particular support for the specialized relationships with insects that only use a small group of plants. So keystone species are ones that are used by quite a few specialist insects for one thing or another. Lots of keystone species are found in our trees and shrubs that are really important to us here in the Midwest and elsewhere. Lots of wildlife benefits in terms of protection, food, shelter, all of the invertebrates and caterpillars, butterflies and moths that rely on them. So lots of value there. Outside of that, though, trees and shrubs provide us with a lot of ecosystem services, helping to stabilize our environment and insulate us somewhat to the changes, particularly that we're seeing with climate change. So trees and shrubs reduce stormwater runoff. They filter and clean that water. That helps prevent erosion. We also find that their respiratory systems help filter and clean our air. Both the shade and the respiratory process reduce the urban heat island effect, which helps keep our cities cooler and safer as we face rising temperatures and climate change. Human well-being is positively affected by being around trees and shrubs. Just landscapes that include lots of trees are shown to result in decreased stress, lower blood pressure, and improved mood for folks that spend time in them. Of course, we have food production. We like our native trees and shrubs for edibles as well. So whether that's wild plums or looking at walnuts or hazelnuts, whether you're doing tapping for maple syrup, lots of great options to add to like a perennial food forest project from our native trees and shrubs. We see a lot of energy savings, of course. Shade on our homes decreases cooling costs in the winter. Windbreaks decrease heating costs, or excuse me, cooling costs in the summer, heating costs in the winter. You all know where I'm going. Trees are great for our property values as well. Treed streets decrease crime rates, encourage us to drive slower and more safely, and homes with mature trees sell significantly for more. And then last but not least, of course, you have a lot of design elements that we turn to trees and shrubs for. So looking for height, structure, fall color, spring blooms, the ability to screen your view and provide privacy. All of these things are reasons to choose trees and shrubs in design as well. So we talk a lot about trees and shrubs. What's the difference? You ever stop to think about that? The answer is there really isn't one. There's not a biological difference between trees and shrubs. We tend to kind of categorize them based on size and growth habits. So a single trunked plant that gets 15 feet or taller with a woody trunk, we call that a tree. Multi-trunked plants that grow shorter than that with a woody trunk, we call those shrubs. I kind of like, if you have to walk around it, it's a shrub. If you can walk under it, it's a tree. So at any rate, we don't need to worry too much about the differences there. There are, of course, small multi-trunked trees and taller single trunk shrubs. So it can get a little mixed up there. The species that I'm going to talk about today are influenced in part by this study done by landscape architect Robert Whitman with Multi-Studio. This is linked in the resources that Chris will drop into the chat. So he convened a group of experts from across disciplines around the KC metropolitan area. These are their top picks for various situations. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested in more options than just what we'll talk about today. I do want to give a little caveat here. Not everything that is included in this report is native, although it heavily leans toward native species. There are some non-native species and there are some cultivars as well. So let this serve, if you look at this report, as a jumping off point for you to do your own research as well. So let's talk first about top performers in the category of large shade trees. We have a lot of keystone species here. So we'll be talking about that as we go along, starting off notably with the oaks. So oaks are the top keystone genus in about 84% of the United States. So even if you're tuning in here from outside the Kansas City area, chances are good that one of the best trees you can plant is an oak. So check out the resources for more on that. But we're looking first at swamp white oak, Quercus bicolor. This is a very long-lived, very adaptable choice, and it's very tolerant of our urban conditions, compaction, drought, wet soils. The name would lead you to think that it needs a marshy place, but it does not. So they do well in average soils as well. Has nice fall color. This is a great candidate for a street tree, which is the space between the street and the sidewalk, and just a really, really nice overall looking tree. There are the leaves during the growing season. The species name bicolor comes from the lighter, they have almost a silvery underside, so kind of two color there. So there's a saying goes with regards to keystone species, if you can only plant one tree, plant an oak. So I want to give you more than one oak choice here. This is Quercus imbricaria, or shingle oak. It is similar in size and shape and growth habit and fall color and almost all of the characteristics other than leaf shape to our overplanted pin oaks, which tend not to do all that well in our high calcium soils here in Kansas City. So this is a great opportunity if you're looking for something that's kind of similar to that pin oak. Take a look at Quercus imbricaria. It does also have a low branching habit similar to the pin oak, so you will need to limit up if you need to have ability to walk underneath it. I've even heard of them being planted in to make a large hedge because of that low branching habit. They do have some leaves that remain through the winter, which is a nice feature in the landscape as well. So looking at our next one, this is black cherry, Prunus serotina. So the Prunus genus is second only to the oaks in its ability to provide for specialized relationships with the caterpillars of moths and butterflies. So if you can only plant two trees, plant an oak and a cherry, or a member of the Prunus genus. So this picture here is indicative of how they tend to grow in nature, kind of tall and growing closely together, reaching past their neighbors to get the sunlight. So it does tend to be a little bit taller and narrower tree, and you can see that in the size information there. Great fragrant bloom in spring. The fall color is nice. The fruit is edible for making jams or baking. It does have a little bit less formal growth habit, but I think it can easily find a place in just about any landscape and provide a lot of value. So there's a look at the beautiful spring flowers that have a really nice kind of sweet, almost almondy smell. Ready for another keystone genus. Here's one. This is Betula. Betula nigra, the river birch, as the name might suggest. Its native preferred growth habitat is creeksides and riversides. So try to plant it there if you can, though it does not particularly need to have that constant moisture. It will tolerate some drought. As our droughts get to be less occasional and more consistent, I would recommend trying to plant this in a way that you don't have to worry about that in the future. That said, it can come through some dry periods just fine. These are fast growing. We tend to plant them with like 5 to 10 year impact in mind. So this planting that I saw in my neighborhood is probably not super sustainable. This is like maybe 3 feet from the foundation there. And so if you look at the mature size of these trees, they do get very large. We are here in Kansas City area, just about 1 county west of their natural range, maybe 2, depending on where you are. But they do tend to do well here. So if that's important to you, and I'll try to point that out as we go along. Most of these are native to the Kansas City area counties, but when we come across one that's just a little outside the range, I'll make sure to mention that. Here's the bark. Really nice winter interest with this nice peeling bark. All right, hackberry is not a keystone genus, Celtis occidentalis, but it is a great wildlife tree. So all kinds of birds will come to the berries, to the fruit. It is really tolerant of our urban condition. It is long-lived, and things like the hackberry emperor butterflies and some of our butterflies that overwinter as adults that you may see flying on warm days in the winter, their caterpillars rely on this tree. So like the morning cloak and question mark butterfly will both use hackberry. Great wildlife tree. The bark is smooth in the younger specimens, but after a handful of years, you get this sort of almost like a topographical map looking a really sort of knobby textured bark. Very cool tree. Another keystone genus is Acer, the maples. So many of us have a maple on our property. I almost feel sometimes like you can sort of date when neighborhoods in Kansas City were built just by looking at the maple species that are common there. So in the 60s and 70s, we were very into silver maples. Which have sort of fallen out of favor in part because there's a very large tree. They tend to have a branched habit or a multi-trunked sort of forking habit, which can make them weak in our winter storms. And they grow quickly, so their wood is not particularly strong, which is those two characteristics often go together. Currently, we're at the tail end of this love affair with the red maple, Acer rubrum, but we're in danger of creating a red maple monoculture. So we need to kind of move away from that. Also somewhat common is the Norway maple, which is not a native species and has been shown to be invasive in some areas of the country. So we want to steer clear of that one as well, which is sort of brings us roundabout back to this maple, the sugar maple, Acer saccharum, is a great choice for wildlife support, a great choice for a yard tree, nice shade species. It has a really nice fall color, and not a great street tree, as you can see there, not really great with compacted soils and road salt, both of which street trees experience. There is the nice fall color. It's a great choice. So that brings us to the end of our large trees, and we'll jump right into the smaller trees, starting with ironwood, or sometimes called hop hornbeam, Ostraya virginiana. This is sort of the largest of the small trees, smallest of the large trees, gets to about 40 feet. They will thrive in full sun to part shade. I generally notice them, sort of edges of the wood type species. So they are a little bit of an understory tree. If you can kind of provide them some partial shade from larger trees nearby, they'll be happy with that. Moist to average soil, definitely can withstand some drought, and has really nice winter and spring interest. These catkins in the spring, the reproductive pollen structures, and then the seed pods here in the fall and winter give us this nice winter interest, and is also the reason for the other common name, hop hornbeam. It looks quite a bit like the hops plant. So nice choice there. Eastern redbud, Cercis canadensis. Everybody's familiar with the redbud. I don't know what I can tell you about redbuds that you might not already know, but we do tend to plant them sort of in the middle of the lawn so they can get all the attention, and they're in full sun often there, which is okay. But if you look at the way they grow in nature, I think it's best to kind of take our cue from that, and where they are more of an edge of the woods type species as well. So if you can give them a little bit of overstory from a neighboring tree, that may help them to thrive. The trunks, as they grow older, sort of lean outward, so not the best choice for that street tree situation. Makes it a little bit hard to walk around them on the sidewalk as they get older, but otherwise it's a great like sculptural interest. An aging redbud is really kind of cool to look at. So very, very nice tree. There's the flower that we all know and love. Next up, looking at serviceberry. This one is, I think, and I hope, becoming more popular. It is found in Kansas City's woodlands and glades. It's also one that will go full sun to part shade. It does not like to have like constantly wet feet, but it will tolerate some higher moisture soils. But where you find it sort of natively is more medium to dry soil. And this is a fabulous tree with something to look forward in like every season. So on the left, we've got these wonderful spring blooms. Then in the summer, you have this really pretty and delicious fruit. You can eat it right off the tree. You can make it into jam or cook with it. You have to beat the birds to it if you want to do that. Because they very much enjoy this. And so you'll have a tree full of birds and have them kind of dancing and darting around, which is really fun. And then finally, there is the lovely fall color on this plant as well. Moving on to deciduous holly or Ilex decidua. So this is a holly that loses its leaves. It is not native to the Kansas City area, but is found just a couple of counties south of us. It does like more moist soil. So here you can see it's planted in a sort of a low spot. Looks like there's a drain there. Looks like that is a place where moisture sometimes gathers during rains, and that lower lying area may stay a little bit wetter. So it should be pretty happy there. It will form fruit if you have both male and female plants. So either plant 3 to 5 so that you can hope for having some of each, or sometimes it is possible to purchase them where they already know what sex you're getting there. So when the leaves fall, the fruit remains on the tree. So you have this lovely, like wonderful winter really stand out in the landscape. The birds will come to this wonderful winter bird feeder. Great tree for wildlife as well. Flowering dogwood is another showy small one that we like to put in the middle of the lawn. It also is sort of an understory species. They would prefer to have a little bit of shelter from the wind and maybe some partial shade from a larger tree. So keep that in mind. The fruits are edible for birds, and maybe a factoid for you here if you didn't know. So the visible flowers that you can see there in the photo, the ones that we notice are actually a modified type of leaf or bract, and the actual flowers of the flowering dogwood, what turns into the fruit, are small little flowers that are inside those 4 petals, if you will. So take a look at that next spring if you have the opportunity. These are not native to the Kansas City area directly, but you could be forgiven for thinking so with as many of them as we have around and like to plant. But you can drive just a couple hours outside of town in the spring and see them bloom, and they do fairly well here. There is the fall color, which can range from yellow to this, deep reddish purple, depending on weather conditions, as always. So moving into some evergreen species, I was going to call this like top performing evergreens, but the fact of the matter is we don't really have a lot of options here. So I'm just going to call it performers. These perform. They if you have the right conditions, these might be good choices. Only one of them, however, is native to Kansas City. That's the eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana. This tree is loved by wildlife and despised by land managers. It has all kinds of cultivars out there if you are looking for options to be able to plant it, and I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But this plant serves an important role in nature. It is an early colonizer of open spaces to make a new woodland after disruption to the soil. They can move in and help to kind of to colonize for a new woodland there. It is tolerant of lots of things that we have in our urban conditions, and it is the host plant for our only green butterfly, the juniper hairstreak. These are the berries, which is actually a modified cone. They are a conifer, which will attract all kinds of birds when they're on the tree as well. And then here is the juniper hairstreak. Juniperus virginiana, the eastern red cedar, is one of the only plants that I personally would consider planting as a cultivar, just because it is our only evergreen option that is native to the Kansas City area. And there are some cultivars that allow you to have a smaller, more manageable size and still retain some of those wildlife benefits. You may make a different decision there. As always, I encourage you to make informed decisions and to plant according to your own values. So looking at some that are not native directly to the Kansas City area, but that we can find nearby in either Kansas or Missouri, we have the American holly, Ilex opaca. When you think of holly, this is probably the leaves that you're thinking of. It does reach a fairly large size, but can be trimmed to shape. So it might be a possibility for a foundation planting. They are intolerant of poor drainage and do need to be protected from the wind. But berries appear in the winter that the birds will come to. And of course, the very classic holly look. If you're in the market for a huge evergreen, you might look at Magnolia grandiflora. These are long-lived, very, very large trees. They are somewhat well adapted to the Kansas City area. These are mostly found to our south and east. They have really thick, leathery leaves that they will drop when they're stressed. So during drought, during harsh winters, those leaves drop. They don't deteriorate very quickly. So depending on what you plant it near, you may have some cleanup to do. And please do plant with size in mind. These also are frequently planted too close to structures. I have a deck that we have one right next to it, and it tries to eat the deck every year. So I have to constantly battle it back. Here is the flower. Despite being perhaps not the best suited for Kansas City's climate, they do have a really unique look, and in the right conditions can be a great addition. Large bees like to come to these flowers, and they'll kind of roll around in that little cup made by the petals and just sort of be drunk on pollen in there. It's really fun to watch. For more evergreen picks, I will refer you back to the tree list. There is an evergreen specific section of that tree list. Now, since we don't have a lot of native evergreens to the Kansas City area, just the one, pretty much everything on this list is not going to be native. But if you would like to use this as a jumping off point, there is some of the ratings provided for each one on their longevity, on how much water they need, on whether they suffer damage when we have really long freezing spells, all those sorts of things. So you can kind of use this to pick a lower input option. All right, moving on to shrubs. So some of my favorite native plants, period, are in this group. Starting off first with a nice choice for a sunny spot, Shrubby St. John's wort, Hypericum prolificum. This tops out at about 6 feet tall by 6 feet wide. It flowers on new growth. You can prune it back in the spring to get that kind of a rounded shape, which is not hard to encourage it to do. That's really sort of its natural growth habit anyway. It is fairly adaptable in terms of moisture, and it also does fairly well in clay soils. So that, with the small size, make it a nice choice for a foundation planting in a sunny spot. It is one of a few plants that bloom during July that I sort of think of as like fireworks. I think the blooms look like fireworks, firecrackers. So this is it here with a multitude of stamens that give it that appearance, and just beloved by pollinators. Sometimes you can hear this whole shrub like buzzing at a distance because of all of the pollinator party going on there. Another nice choice for full sun to part shade is Ozark witch hazel, Hamamelis vernalis. This blooms in winter. So this is in our region like the earliest, calendar year wise, the earliest blooming native plant. So it has these really, really cool looking flowers that open in like January or February. The scent is sweet and kind of spicy, very fragrant. And it just looks really good through the rest of the season as well. So there it is blooming on the left. The leaves have a nice texture and color to them. It's a nice like back of the garden plant or mixed into a mixed shrub border. And then there is the fall color on the right there. Next up, we have buttonbush, another of my favorites, another of the fireworks plants here. These do like to have their feet wet, so they will do fine in average soil. I see them planted just in yards that are not appreciably moist, but if you have the opportunity to give it some additional moisture, it will certainly like that. These blooms occur in June. They're very fragrant, and they turn into these really interesting seed heads that persist through the fall and winter. So it is a really nice plant. It is also a really sculptural shrub. So it just has a really nice looking growth habit. And if you want to see some good examples of that, you can check them out on the south side of the building at the Discovery Center. Has a few there. So they're really, really a nice option. Another like fragrant favorite of mine here is golden currant or Ribes odoratum. You may sometimes see this listed as a variety of Ribes aureum. Not sure, is it a separate species? Is it not? While the taxonomists argue, I'm just gonna like enjoy this plant because it has the sweetest, most beautiful fragrance. It has wonderful berries, and is just a winner in my book. It is, if you're familiar with gooseberries and sort of their growth habit, this is a close relative, and it grows in much the same way. So it's not the most formal looking plant, but I think deserves a place in a more naturalistic space, and is really, can work well in semi-formal gardens as well. You do need multiple plants for fruit. They don't need to be separate sexes. These they're dioecious, so they have both sexes on the same plant, but they do need to be genetically different. I chose this one in part because it is native to Kansas City area, as well as farther to our north and west. I feel like so often we're kind of looking to the south and east and finding plants that work well there. But so this one continues on into like Colorado, Montana. There is the fruit. Now, here's one that does do well in many formal landscapes, the hydrangea arborescens. Most of us are familiar with at least some version of this plant because it is very widely cultivated. I think once you get to love the true native species, that the cultivars look they're a little over the top, in my opinion, to each their own. But this is, I think, a really, really lovely look as just the true native species. One thing you should be aware of is that the flowers on our cultivars are generally made up only of these false flowers. Those are the larger ones around the outside, and those may attract pollinator interest, but the real bounty, the actual support and the nectar and the pollen are in this the center flowers there. And so what we've done with our cultivars is often created a pretty but sterile plant that doesn't have anything to provide for pollinators. So the seeds or the remaining heads of those false flowers through the wintertime. I know a lot of people like the cultivars for that, but I think this is just as interesting, maybe more. So find a somewhat shady spot and see what you think. So there is no like one size fits all species, but I think in terms of shrubs, 9-bark comes fairly close. So this is very adaptable, sun to shade, dry to moist, has these really pretty flowers. It has this nice like arching habit. And the bark has a peeling texture to it, which is where it gets the common name 9-bark, that provides some winter interest in the landscape. It is also one that you can find cultivars of. The true native species is really, really nice looking, but particularly do avoid any cultivars that have red leaves, which is somewhat common with this shrub. They just simply are not as beneficial to caterpillars and other insects. All right, so that concludes our tour through species, and we're going to spend the rest of our time here looking at planting, care, pruning. So we'll dive right in and try to help you avoid some common mistakes. So just like with any plant, and perhaps more importantly, given their size and longevity, right plant, right place definitely applies here. So consider that placement carefully. Do call for utility marking anytime you're going to anytime you're going to dig or plant, but particularly when we're looking at planting a tree. So their roots are not going to necessarily cause problems with underground wires or anything like that. But when that utility needs to fix or upgrade their system and they trench right through the mature roots of a large tree, that is a huge shock to that plant, and will not be good for the overall life and health of the tree. So do watch out for that, as well as ensuring adequate distance from any overhead lines, sidewalks, driveways, that sort of thing. So here in the picture, you can see that sidewalk is lifted a little bit, maybe from the roots of that tree. I think it's a common misconception that you just can't plant a tree between the sidewalk and the street without this happening, but that's certainly not the case. And in the resources, there's some options for some sidewalk friendly street trees. Do be mindful of mature size. We've talked about that a few times so far already. and plant for the longevity of the tree and not that quick aesthetic appeal. Do also be mindful of the fact that fast growth, which is something we desperately want when you have no trees and you're planting something, may mean weaker wood. So if you're choosing something that has that characteristic, make sure that you have enough distance to avoid storm damage to homes and property. Selections like the silver maple, like cottonwood, like sycamore, tulip tree are like fantastic trees. And please, if you have the space, plant them. For those of us who don't have the space, they're wonderful for wildlife, and don't get the attention they deserve. But they are large and do tend to drop limbs in storms. So, and finally, plant for succession. So if you have a mature tree on one side of your yard, now might be the time to plant a new tree on the other side of your yard. So you want to plant replacements for those long-lived trees well before they're needed. Otherwise, you're having to wait until that tree has to come out, and then you're starting with a very, very small species. So do research the lifespan of your tree and make sure you're looking at its lifespan in like neighborhood, urban, suburban conditions, because that is going to be different from the lifespan that they might achieve in the wild. And there are a lot of reasons for that. So how to kill a tree. This poor tree is planted too close to the house, too deep, too narrow a hole. It's got suffering all kinds of damage, both above and below ground. And so any number of these will detrimentally affect the health of the tree. So this graphic is listed in the resources if you want to check that out. We're going to cover a lot of these today, but you can also delve into some of the ones that are not there. So that last graphic had a lot of mistakes that individuals make, and we'll talk some about those as we go along. But our biggest mistake as people, as communities, is a lack of diversity. This is a photo from Boulder, Colorado, where they're cutting down a whole street full of ash trees. So whenever we choose monocultures and fail to plant with diversity, we are not only failing to provide the resources for a wide variety of butterflies and bees and birds that rely on our planting choices. We also encourage the easy spread of diseases and pests that may cause problems with the tree. So we saw that in the first half of the 20th century with the American elm trees. We're seeing it now with the invasive emerald ash borer. So, you know, as communities, I do think we are starting to be more mindful and be aware of this. This is obviously very expensive to remove and replace, and it does seem like we're doing a better job including more species in our younger replacement plantings, which is great. As an individual, you can look around your neighborhood and plant something that your neighbors don't have. Contribute to the diversity of resources, the diversity of plants available in your neighborhood. Okay, so it's planting time. Just a couple of quick tips on this. First, throughout the whole process, we're going to avoid lifting the tree by the trunk. That puts undue stress on the roots as the weight of the root ball pulls down. So we want to lift it by the pot or the root ball or whatever it's in. And then we want to pull back the soil to expose the root flare. So this picture is an example. You don't need to remove all the soil, but this is the root flare where that little arrow is. So just the first lateral root that comes out from the trunk. We want to make sure that we locate that, and we want to make sure that we keep it visible throughout the planting process. The next thing we want to do is loosen any circling roots. So often in a pot or in the burlap ball, whatever your tree has come in, you may have roots that are starting to curve around the edges. It is really important to straighten those out, to cut through them if you need to. That is going to be a little bit of stress to the tree, but if we don't do it now, this is what happens. So this is what's called a girdling root, and it will girdle or strangle the tree as time goes on. This will grow thicker and thicker and tighter and prevent the exchange of nutrients between the roots and the tree. So So it's definitely worth it to take a few moments, because the saddest part of this is it's going to take years for this to happen. So by that point, you have a mature tree that you're attached to, that you're enjoying the benefits of, that you have to, pay more to have it taken out, or, deal with the consequences if it dies and falls. So please do be aware of that and take a few moments up front. So then we're going to dig our hole. We want to dig wide and shallow, so 2 to 3 times the width of the root ball. Most of those early roots are going to be moving outward from the tree, and so they can do that more easily through loosened soil. Again, you can see the root flare there at the top. We're going to keep that at the surface level of the soil. Having it a little higher is better than having it too deep, in part because the tree will settle during those first few waterings and storms. And then we're going to stand back and take a look at the tree and make sure that it looks pleasing to us. Make sure that the trunk is plum or oak or maple or whatever it may be. Anyway, make sure it's straight up and down, and kind of tilt and turn and do whatever we need to do to take a few minutes now to make some adjustments that are going to last decades. And once we have everything the way we like it, then we can fill the hole, packing the soil in gently. But we do want to make sure that we remove any air pockets that can fill up with water and then damage the tree. So we're going to also add a wide mulch ring here. So it is covering that entire hole except for the couple of inches around the trunk. We'll talk a little bit more about why. Going to water it in well, both to help those air pockets settle out, and then give the tree a good long drink. You can do ongoing watering with either a watering bag like this, or a 5-gallon bucket with a hole drilled in the side, and fill that up once a week or so. New trees and shrubs generally do not get watered as much as they should. They need about 1 inch of water or rainfall or snowfall per week for the first 3 to 5 years. So pretty much year round. Watering thoroughly, less frequently, is much better than a little each day. Our automatic sprinkler systems and lawns and stuff are great for your grass carpet, but not good for trees particularly. So slowly apply that water periodically. Staking is optional, but definitely want to be aware of the materials that we use. Don't let the wires contact the trunk there. And remember that staking is temporary. This should be removed. This is no more than like a 1-year thing, and then let the tree stand on its own. And of course, remember to remove your stakes or your tree might eat them. After planting, we don't want to prune yet, only if there was any damage, because the tree needs all of the resources from those food producing leaves to help it combat transplant stress and build a new root system. We can start pruning for the mature shape later. And then after planting, we want to keep it mulched. So she's formed a donut here of mulch around the tree, and that's definitely what we want, donuts, not volcanoes. Unfortunately, this is seen way too often. So this keeps moisture. It keeps the mulch that's in there is producing heat. It is decomposing. Lots of opportunity here for insects, for moisture, for fungus growth, all of those sorts of things that will impact the tree. And then additionally, this is what happens after several years of the mulch volcano, is you get the roots seeking water, seeking resources, growing through that volcano. And sometimes, as you can see is starting to happen here, forming those girdling roots and damaging the tree. So definitely avoid the volcanoes, go for donuts instead. So looking a little bit at pruning, I have some resources in the linked document that will help you understand a bit more about the whys of pruning and what to prune. I'm going to talk mostly today about how to prune. And so starting off with the 3-cut system, this is what we want to use when pruning any larger limbs. So if I was to go and make a cut at B, you can imagine that by the time I get like halfway through that branch, the weight of what's left is going to be pulling that down. And that can actually then just tear and strip the bark all the way down the trunk of the tree in some cases. So we're going to protect that by making our first cut at A and making a partial cut on the bottom of the branch. That way, when we cut B, that can only tear as far as A, and then we have the weight off and for safety and convenience, then we can concentrate on making our final cut, which is going to be made to ensure that the tree can heal properly. We'll talk about that in a minute. So here is looking at a tree in my side yard that has been absolutely butchered by previous homeowners. Want to draw your attention to some well-healed wounds here. That is what the scar should eventually look like, something similar to that. This one, I think it probably is never going to be able to close that. There was probably cut too far out from the tree, and it can't get those the healing tissues around it. So that's going to be a permanent place where insects and moisture and everything can get into the tree and affect it detrimentally. So, and then this final one here is almost it. I think this one may heal okay. So this is what we want to see, is that nice donut, very into donuts today, of like healing tissue. This should be roughly what it looks like after a couple of years. So that's going to heal successfully, and it's going to be able to close that wound. We don't want to put anything on the cuts. That is an outdated practice and does not help. So looking more at how and where we're going to make our cuts, we need to know a little bit of the tree's anatomy. So on the top there is the bark ridge, where the bark seems to sort of wrinkle up a little bit. And the bottom is the branch collar. And that is where it's a little bit thicker and then narrows into the branch. So a lot of people would make this cut. That is not what we want to do. I put it in red because no, don't do that. We want our final cut to be here. But of course, since we're doing a 3-cut system, it's going to really look like this. So there's A, there's B, taking the majority of the weight off, and then there's C. So we want to cut avoiding the bark ridge and right from the area where the branch collar meets the branch. And that is going to help that tree to heal properly. As far as timing of pruning, please research your species, both in terms of things like preserving flowers for the next season. Some are going to have those buds present starting in the fall. Some are going to flower on new growth in the spring. So do check that. We don't want to prune trees in the early spring when they're mobilizing lots of nutrients and sap from the roots up into the tree. It's just a more tender time. And then obviously if you have damage from storms or hazards, do need to take care of those right away. There's nothing you can do about that. So how much can we prune? Not that much. Definitely not that much. Don't do that. So I hope this was like on this tree's way to being taken out entirely, but because this is frightening. But you don't want to take out any more than 20% of the living branches of a tree at any one time. And in general, we want to reserve pruning for damaged branches, for rubbing branches, crossed branches, and to help ensure the strong structure of the tree. Sometimes you do need to do some additional pruning for clearance for things like sidewalks and driveways and houses, stuff like that. If you do need to take out more than 20% for any reason, please try to do that over multiple years if you can. And finally, don't top your trees. Don't let anybody do this. I think this is going out of favor, but used to be as either a response to or prevention for storm damage, just making a horizontal cut at the top of the trunk, which not only looks terrible, but you can see that scar did not heal, won't heal properly. And so then you have all of these branches coming up around the outsides of it, none of which are as strong as the original structure of the tree would be. And that as they get larger, they're pulling, and the wound there is rotting out. And so you get this, like, I feel like it's a recipe for storm damage rather than a remedy. So don't do this. And I think that, yeah, so that's from top to bottom. We have covered a lot of ground today. Thank you for being here. And if Chris would want to come back with me, we'll take some questions.
Questions abound. This is such an interesting and engaging subject. Everybody knows trees and everybody has questions about them. Let's just get straight into the meat of it so as to not run too long.
Sure.
Service berries and junipers. Let's talk about this. First of all, do service berries need male and female to produce berries? That's monoecious on one
Yes.
plant, dioecious on 2 plants, right?
Yeah.
Are service berries all together in one?
Yes. To my knowledge,
Okay.
you don't
Yeah.
need multiple for that.
So they just need a good pollinator, and
Mhm.
a good native garden can bring those in. Excellent. If
Absolutely.
you can
Yeah.
beat the
Yeah.
birds to the service berries, it's a delicious treat
Right.
for us as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
Maybe a question that Sid might be able to answer, since she maintains buttonbush often.
Mm.
Can or is it good to deadhead buttonbush to rebloom, or is it a one-time bloom?
Ooh, that I don't know, Sydney.
I think that's a great question. I would not deadhead my button bush to get it to bloom because, unlike, well, since it's a shrub rather than a perennial forb, like a flower, I'd be worried it would cause damage to the overall structure of the plant. Yeah, I would just enjoy the blooms while you have them.
There we go. I would think that pruning in the middle of the season could also open it up to vectors for disease and things like that too, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, for sure.
Too
And
much stress.
I think more of deadheading in terms of just like removing the spent flower versus like making a pruning cut, into the wood. But I'm not sure that that would be successful
Yeah.
with buttonbush. So if
Let's
anybody
dig
wants to
in and
try it, let me know.
yeah, give it a whirl. And feed us back your experiences. A couple questions, another one from Alan Johnson, and it ties into Maria's question here. Shrub recommendations for small urban gardens. I think you highlighted a couple that would fit within a 6 foot or less and 4 foot or thinner window. And Maria wants to know where to purchase them, like maybe this
Oh,
Saturday.
yeah, yeah, no, I catch a drift. Yeah, Sydney has a recommendation in the chat there that I like. Spice bush is also one that is smaller, especially if you have a part shade situation. It is a nice choice as well. I'm trying to think other small choices. I really like lead plant. When you buy them, it's probably going to be, just teeny tiny. They just don't grow that large in a pot. But if you can get them established, it's a great both in terms of the contrast in color, because they have this nice bluish green cast, kind of fern-like leaves, and then the flowers are a knockout. So it's another one that I like. In terms of purchasing trees and shrubs, as Chris alluded to, Deep Roots is hosting a native plant sale on Saturday, and I think the hours were in the rotating slide, or you'll I'm sure be able to mention those. And Forest Keeling will be there. This is won't they? Yes. Okay. This
Yeah.
is one of the few times that they come across the state and set up a sale here during the year. So that's always a treat. They grow a ton of native trees and shrubs, as well as the other growers that will be there have a good selection too. Missouri Wildflowers and City Roots are ones that I frequently go to, as well as So Wild Natives, in terms of being able to find some of these great species.
Yeah, a number of vendors. I'll highlight that here at our outro.
Yeah.
Pat had one of the first questions, which is excellent. In our urban environments, we have to toe the line between hazards to human traffic and things like that, and ecosystem support. Which oaks perhaps have a lower hazard or less hazard due to acorns on sidewalks? My thought first is smaller acorns, less trippy.
Mm-hmm.
Willow oaks, pin oaks. Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I have a shingle oak that doesn't do too bad in terms of numbers of production. So they're a little bit larger acorn, but not as many. Yeah, that's absolutely a great point there. There's a pin oak, the oak that I highlighted with the poor pruning is right above our driveway, which is part of why it's been hacked so often, because it does drop plenty of acorns. So yeah, absolutely keep that in mind. That's one of those like pre-planting, pre-selection things that just takes a few minutes, but affects decades down the line. So with trees and shrubs, there's so much of that in terms of just taking a few extra moments to think through your choices and to be careful in planting and pruning, and all those sorts of things have a really long lasting effect.
Absolutely. A couple more here. Just an
Mhm.
interesting point from Jacob in the audience here. in their juniper plantings, the birds are so gregarious that the robins and the waxwings, he says, they devour the berries before winter. They don't wait for a winter food source. They're gone.
Yeah.
Maybe kind of a grasshopper and the ants type of metaphor
Yes.
going on there. Impatient birds are hungry in the winter. And I noticed we've got the honor of having Robert Whitman himself in the webinar today,
yay!
the developer and kind of lead researcher on that document that we hold up so high here.
Hi,
And I
Robert.
wanted to throw this question out because, you know, that list was first you know, kind of put out maybe almost 10 years ago, but yet we continue to see updates and we continue to see adaptations in response to, or rather, I guess let's put it as a question: how do we continue to see adaptations to these recommendations in response to climate change in the metro area here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and maybe Robert can correct me, I believe that the report was published in 2019 or 2020, though a lot of the like initial survey work was as you said, done 2012, 2013, 2009 originally. Okay. So
Yeah,
yeah, like things like, oh, this plant will survive occasional drought. Our definition of occasional drought has probably changed quite a bit in the last 10 years. It certainly should have, you know. So both in terms of severity and length, we are expected in the future in Kansas City to get with climate change patterns, as far as we're able to predict now, we're expected to get more rainfall per year, but much less often. So that has a big effect on particularly trees that need, you know, hundreds of gallons of water a day, pulling up from their roots in terms of what they're able to access, what they're able to store. And then when we do get those rains, they're falling on hard pan and more likely to run off more quickly. So Robert says next version will include where the tree is native. Yay, that's great. But so for things
excellent.
like a river birch, which we do traditionally say, like, yeah, they don't have to have wet feet, you know, average soil is fine. Average soil has been fine. And then if we have weeks where it's 105 every day and we don't have rain for weeks, average soil may be less fine than we used to say it was. So yeah, it's important, I think, for us to keep revisiting these things, and to continue to ask the experts who are, you know, working in horticulture and arborists and all of that, who are, you know, really seeing all of these species on a day-to-day basis, and to learn from their recommendations. So I look forward to hearing more from Robert and his surveyees. So.
Absolutely. I would also like to make a small plug here for our Planet Native conference in February of 2024, where we'll be hosting an incredible scholar of natives, Guy Sternberg from the Star Hill Arboretum, who's going to be leading a riveting session on climate change and native trees. So stay tuned for our registration opening for the Planet Native Conference, February 15th and 16th in Kansas City, Missouri, coming in 2024. We're back in person coming up here. So many more questions, but we're already at our 11 o'clock. We'll try to kind of address some of those in our resources as we send those back out. Just an incredible thanks to Sarah, again, for all that you do, but specifically for bringing this in. The timing of a tree and shrub session as we lead into September, as we open into the plant sale season, is just impeccable. And you're always appreciated, and the aptly given presentation today.
Thank you.
Before
Love
we
being here.
yeah, absolutely. Be careful, you may never get out. But we would like to wrap things up here again with just a huge thanks both to Robert in our audience for the contribution to the scholarship of trees in the Kansas City metro region. But I want to let you know a few, of course, and to Sarah, pardon. But I want to let you know a few things before we go here. Reiterating, as Sydney said, join Sydney this Saturday at the Anita B. Gorman Discovery Center for the Deep Roots Fall Plant Sale. She's put together a phenomenal collection of vendors, including Blackroot and Forest Keeling, who are going to have product on site. native trees and shrubs, just a great assortment of things that are appropriate for this region, as well as other native landscape and ecosystem stewardship providers that are kind of broadening the scope of what our plant sales can do. You're going to have volunteer experts on hand to help you make the best selections for your fall planting projects. And as much as I adore the heat of the Midwest summer, fall is a really invigorating time to be in the garden. Prepare for that dormant season and install next year's superstars into the plant community that you steward. Saturday, 10 to 2 p.m. at 4750 Troost Avenue in KC just east of the plaza in the museum district. Native landscape chats, those are going to be in-person events. Just had one last week. First Friday at 1 p.m. at the Anita Gorman Discovery Center as well, where you can just join Sydney, Alex, and other native plant nerds in person for a walk around the grounds, seeing what's in bloom, and just sharing fellowship and questions and conversation about native landscapes. Stay tuned 2 weeks from today at noon again. Native Plants at Noon is back on the road, just a short drive up to the northeast of the metro. We're going to be exploring Pussy Conservation Area in Livingston County up near Chillicothe. The Conservation Department staff are going to explore this habitat, and it contains some wonderful things: fern-draped rock bluffs, really dense timbered hardwood, oak, and hickory woodlands, with rolling grass expanses, that classic Missouri savanna landscape, and tons of wildlife. I've never been up to that part of the state personally, and I'm rather excited for a sneak peek into that gorgeous conservation area. Be sure to check out all of our events and webinars on our website at www.deeproots.org/events. And while you're there, if you would consider making a donation to support our organization, our mission, and programs just like this, we would be eternally grateful. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in a few weeks for Native Plants at Noon. Always remember, what you plant matters.